Okay, segment 2 of institutions and institutional reform. We left off with criminal justice. We were talking about some drug reform and taking a look into how those things could be changed, that in the educational system. So the next topic I want to get into is the media. The institution of how news and current events are delivered to us. So long ago, we're all familiar. I mean, I would say the majority of news came from periodicals and the major networks via TV. That's changed a lot now with the advent of the internet and the information age, and now we have access to the famous fake news. It's hard to discern, the real from the not, and the institution of the media has changed quite a bit in the last, couple decades here. So I think one of the first things I want to talk about in terms of how the world currently works is, let's talk about the major networks. They still have a big foothold, obviously, in a lot of American households. And let's focus specifically on America, because I think this is particularly applicable. I know media spin is a global pandemic, but what do you think? I think we all know the main networks like the Fox, CNN, NBC, and all those, the biases and whether they lean to the right or the left. And I think we all have a general understanding. But is there anything you guys think, and what are your thoughts on those networks and what they feed us?
Well, recently, I feel like they've been doing a good job of actually not being fake news, as much as Trump would like to try and say they are. Because, I mean, they're doing a good job of calling the government out on what the government's been doing wrong, and especially with, like, what's on MSNBC, the short-haired anchor, the woman... what is her? I can't think of her name right now.
I'm not sure.
She gets really impassioned about everything Trump and everything.
Not Nancy
Grace.
Nancy Grace? Not her, right? Blonde?
No, not the blonde. No. Why can't I think of her name? I love watching her. Anyway.
Speaking of which, let me interrupt you. If Megan Kelly is listening, I would love to take you out for a nice seafood dinner.
Ignore him.
But anyway, continue.
But I think recently they've been doing a good job of because they're kind of being forced by the current administration to prove that, hey, we are credible. Hey, we are, we're not just...
I wouldn't even say I would say the population. I mean, I think, the media has almost become such a punchline. It's like, one thing I do want to say, though, is I think a lot of the biases bleed through. I mean... I've commented, and again, I try to stay as neutral as I can. I put positive things about Obama, negative things about Obama, positive things about Trump, negative things. I don't really think you can define somebody in a polarized, light. It's not fair, I think, to say they're totally evil, unless you're talking about, like, Hitler or whatever. I think, like, for example, I put a post up of the Washington Post not too long ago, and I said, I would love to see... I get that they're calling out Trump's missteps. Mm-hmm. They should.
Yeah.
They completely should. But I literally have not seen one positive article on him from the Washington Post. For example, I'm sure, hopefully they're out there, but I haven't seen one. It's like...
As far as I've understood, and I even in high school, my AP US Gov teacher, one of his big comments about the Washington Post is they kind of see it as their job to just take a daily dump on the White House. And
really?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess they're right there.
No,
so
and nobody in the White House really, and even if you ever watch the HBO show Veep, they've always got all the media outlets around.
Yeah.
And the guy from the Washington Post is always the one that when they see him in a group, they go, guys, shut up, don't say a word. He'll spin it in the most absolute worst way he possibly can.
Yeah.
Like, they just loathe seeing the Washington Post walk over.
And I don't know how they reported on Obama, so maybe that is a trend. I don't know. And that's, I should do some research into that. But I just thought it was ironic, because I hate... when journalism isn't genuine. I think the purpose of journalism is to actually report facts, right? From an unbiased point of view, and I just hate that that's such a prevalent,
They have to make it dramatic now because they have to be entertaining.
Yeah, well, that too. They have to maintain relevancy, and that is a big thing. I think that the internet again has contributed positively to. I think it's good that the internet has made them at least attempt to try and be relevant by reporting facts. And so I don't know. I just wish there was more, neutral reporting when it comes to a lot of networks. So one thing I want to cover though, and this is more along the lines of how the world really should work, is the growth and we're seeing the rise of kind of the independent networks. One of the most credible, I would probably say, and whether or not people agree with me or not, would be the Drudge Report. I think Matt Drudge does a good job of trying to you see WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, whatever people want to say about his politics, I think he's forced a lot of accountability. And I mean, you see things with the Panama Papers. I won't go into detail there, but for the people listening, I would recommend you do research into the Panama Papers. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I may be wrong, but WikiLeaks was one of the main contributors to uncovering that. And it was a bunch of papers that, documents from a firm that I think was like somewhere in South America that listed ties from every facet of society. I mean, celebrities, politicians. I think the guy, like the prime minister or whatever of Iceland, some country had to step down because of these papers being uncovered. It was talking about how they were shielding assets illegally and dodging taxes and stuff while they write the very policies that are doing those same things to their constituents. So I think these independent networks have contributed enormously to the direction that society should be moving in. I will say, just because he's an entertaining guy, what are y'all's thoughts on Alex Jones? The InfoWars anchor.
I think he's an entertaining guy. I mean, honestly.
Do you think? Okay,
I think he could calm down a little bit.
Actually, I saw something, and he had I guess the divorce settlement. I saw this in the news not too long ago. He admitted, I'm sure part of this was to, show that he's stable, but he said that a lot of that is his character. He's playing a character.
I know it's a character. Yeah.
But is it? That's what I want to know.
Part of that's got to be, if you're able to pull it off that well,
right,
there's a little bit of something in the back of your head that really wants to do it. So.
I think, and he gets a lot of flack on, and he's the brunt of a lot of jokes too. But I think he's have you ever watched him and listened? Yeah. I really think he wants to do the right thing.
He's well thought out. He's he's not just getting up there and rambling off at the top of his head.
I don't think it's fair that a lot of people make the joke out of him that they do. I'm not saying he's. I mean, if he's talking about like the reptilian taking over the government, I think it's pushing it a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean, once again, his character sometimes does kind of, bring forth the jokes and the.
He would say he's like the absolute pinnacle of conspiracy theorist. I would say that's probably the best way to describe it. Which a lot of it, there's a lot of truth to a lot of the things that he says. Maybe some of the things are a little bit absurd, but.
I do like that one that you don't have listed on our little outline here is The Blaze. With,
The Blaze.
Tommy Loren. Yeah, I don't like her. I don't. I think she's. Look, girl. I think you're beautiful. I do. I think you're really pretty, but I think you need to shut your mouth.
Didn't she?
She got fired.
Yeah, she got fired.
And
a lot of great layoffs. Bill O'Reilly.
Yeah. Right.
See you later.
So there you go. But my thing is with all these the independent news, because you mentioned the internet being a big part of what's helping out, is a lot of these independent news outlets are using Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and they're posting to the internet. They're not actually getting on TV and doing all this stuff. They're using Tommy Lorraine. I swear to God, there for a little while, I couldn't go a day on Facebook without scrolling past a video and then accidentally getting the audio start playing. I'm just like, girl, I'm tired of hearing
I think
your
her
voice.
biggest problem was the manner in which she spoke to her listeners.
She was a jerk.
She was very condescending.
She was a jerk. Yeah, she was. And to be completely honest, there were times where I'd listen to her start to talk and I'd go, look, I get it. You're very far right, okay?
Yeah.
We all understand. But you've got to understand that what you're saying is just wrong sometimes.
You're either going to... It's polarizing. You're either going to make people stand up and give you a standing ovation, or you're going to piss them off, super bad.
And
that was a good... I mean, for her, it got her famous.
It got her famous. Then it got her fired. So
yeah, but I will say, whether or not you're on the left or the right, it doesn't matter. I appreciate and respect, like I said, people with conviction, and I think that things will never change if it's not for people like her or like Bill or people that care enough to get up and you know, talk about it for reasons other than trying to stroke their own ego and become famous. And who knows what her particular, you know, motivations or motives were, but I think that is needed in our society, especially with how out of control the world has gotten. I talked about this a while back, that, you know, our generation, the millennial generations, never experienced that feeling of where, you know, of community. That I always try to equate it to like the 60s when Kennedy was president, the space race. We had this big goal that everyone as a country was pushing towards, that brought everyone together, rather than the crap that we have to deal with that we've always known that's driving us apart. Mm-hmm. We've never had that as a generation, you know, somebody at the helm that's creating that unity. And I think that's a very sad, depressing reality that our generation has faced. So it's important to have people that are attempting to. With Tommy, I think she was more divisive than she was unifying. But
yeah, for sure.
You know, but this kind of thing, and you know, people that are trying to do the right thing for the right reasons, I think.
But, you know, also I think with her, like you said, with the InfoWars guy, I think part of her, because, I mean, she does have a history in being in that role.
That organization?
Well, no, not the Blaze, but she had a short stint. She had a stint somewhere else before that, and it's part of what got her fired. And she was a character. I mean,
really?
what she put on for the Blaze was a character, just like what he puts on for InfoWars is. So I think as a person, and like if you were to meet her face to face, she wouldn't be without the camera on. She's not who she is with the camera on, which I think is another big thing. Is when you get, just because you're in front of a camera, if you're going to get in front of a camera that is paying you to be somebody that you're not, you need to be in front of a different camera.
Right.
I'm sorry.
That's a big topic that I think just in general being real is such a. I mean, that's really the bottom line of all of this that we're talking about. People aren't real. People aren't genuine. People are manipulative and deceitful, and that's really kind of the underlying common denominator that applies to every single topic that we talk about. But that's a monster we can't even touch right now because that would take forever. But Johnny, what do you think? Anything on the media for the time being? What do you think, or what do you think could change? Well, the way the world should work. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's good that these independent networks are kind of nudging out the big guys, or?
Oh, absolutely. But I think it has a lot to do on where you're getting your news from. For example, if you're getting it from Facebook, well, Facebook's timeline is tailored for your interests. So if you are, say if you were Democratic, it's going to be filled with things that Trump has done wrong.
That's a really good point.
Everything like that. I went on to a Republican site the other day, a Facebook page, and it has news articles on things that he's actually done right. So I think it's a lot to do on where you get your...
That's a really good point, actually. And before you go on, I want to commend you for actually making that point, because you're exactly right. And Facebook, if that is the big, because that is an issue. People do get their news from Facebook, and people do need to understand that these opinions, when you're shaping your opinion and the perspective based upon what these articles are being fed to you, of course you're going to think that these negative, because that's what like Johnny is pointing out. See, that's why I like how he has a better understanding of all this technological stuff. Because that's something I don't think a lot of people would not even consider, but because they have no reason. I didn't even think about that really until you just said it. That all that Facebook's doing is exacerbating your own predispositions. You're not getting informed.
Absolutely.
So, but yeah, sorry. I just wanted to applaud you for that. But continue.
But that's my main thing with that. But and a lot of journalists in the TED Talk. I went to me and Matt went to a TED Talk convention earlier this year, and a journalist spoke, and he said, he spoke, and he said that a lot of journalists are in it for the right reasons, but when you have these larger news outlets such as like CNN, the heads of
he was talking about why people hate the media, right? That was the point of his...
Yeah.
That one? Okay.
Yeah. They're given something to talk about. It's not so much of... that's their actual view on it or whatnot. that is the case a lot of times, but a lot of times it's not. So I think a lot of the media heads are dictating what the American people hear, and what their anchors are getting across to.
Well, and to build on, and actually, I'm going to try to find that who that was, because he was the guy from MTS, Ken Paulson, right?
Paulson,
president of the Newseum Institute's First Amendment Center, USA Today columnist. I think he's like a VP at Middle Tennessee State University or something, like a vice chancellor or something like that. But his talk was why people hate the media and how journalists get such a bad rap. Maybe he wasn't the MTSU guy. Maybe I'm confusing him.
President.
Oh, he's president. Okay, well, even better.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he has a lot going on then. But that was his point. He was like, most journalists aren't bad. I mean, look at the guys over in Afghanistan and stuff,
right,
literally dodging bullets to deliver the actual truth. Right, those are the people who deserve to be getting these Nobel prizes and stuff. A lot of them, and deserve the money that the Rupert Murdochs and stuff are earning. And a lot of times, you're right. I mean, that those figureheads are the ones dictating what stuff and content they're going to be putting out to their viewers and listeners. So I think that's a really good point. And journalists definitely need to be looked at more fairly.
And do you remember the name of the British journalist that had enough on the air and he just went off on his own? And reported his own news.
The funny guy, the guy that's like really funny, that guy.
No, the one that like exploded because somebody said something into his ear and he's like, "No, I'm just gonna report
the news." Yeah, he's the funny guy.
Okay.
His name's what is his name?
Is it John something?
No. But that guy's hysterical, and everybody, if you're listening, you need to pause this instantly and YouTube. His name's
one time where we're gonna tell you to not
British
listen to us for a second.
Journalist. Let's see. Yeah, he's like, this is the news.
He gets real.
Yeah, I mean, he's become now an act, but and his skits now are rehearsed, but the stuff he says is real.
Yeah.
He presents it in a hilarious way, but what is his name?
Which actually, once you've, if I can interject for just a second while you're looking that up, something we haven't mentioned, and I think we should, your satirical news outlets. And when I say satirical news outlets, well, not even necessarily The Onion, because I mean The Onion is kind of legitimately just fake news, because they take these things and they really do twist them and make fun of them, and they do put fake stuff into it. But when I say I mean like I'm talking about like, here we go, Comedy Central. When The Daily Show was with Jon Stewart, I haven't watched it much since Trevor Noah took over, but when Jon Stewart was the host of The Daily Show, yes, it wasn't real news, but I mean, it was events that had happened that week, it was stuff, and Jon Stewart is a smart guy, he is a guy that's trying to...
Jon Stewart.
Yeah, I love him, he's awesome, and, I would watch that show, and sure, he's being a comedian, and he's making fun of it all, but... At the end of the day, he would report on this stuff, and he would get down and get real about it sometimes.
There are messages in it,
Yeah, exactly. So even those outlets sometimes can be a little bit more legit than, the fake news outlets.
That's good. Good comedy is really being able to connect with people and what's real in a way that's entertaining.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I think, Dave Chappelle's one of my favorites.
And I think Larry Wilmore, he had a late show for a little while, and he did really well also, where, like, it wasn't, like, news, but he was talking about the events of the week, and he was...
The probably one of the smartest comedians I think that have ever lived. He just died recently.
George Carlin. Oh my God! I wish he was still alive.
Perfect.
He would be, dude. He'd be
Jonathan Pye. That's
his name. Yeah, that's right.
So anybody listening, please pause this on YouTube. Jonathan Pye.
But then please come right back.
Telling the news. Explicit alert. I mean, he curses a lot, but he's absolutely hilarious. So yeah, I mean, I think just in terms of how the world should work and maintaining that direction here in the conversation, I think that's good. I think the internet has given a lot of. I mean, it's got its pluses and minuses and pros and cons, but I think it's given the common people a voice and a good way to connect and tell the truth. Which is a good segue into government. Now, before we get into government, I want to preface it with, we actually have another episode, another show that we're going to record that's particularly focused on corruption and social control, which is a kind of a sociologist's way of saying, the powers that be and how they, function and manipulate society. And government's going to be a big portion of that. but just from more of like a higher level point of view, government institutions. Let's talk about those for just a minute and how they currently function and how things can change. Before we get into the details, do you guys have any open-ended thoughts on that?
On government?
On government.
I think, in my opinion at least, I like how ours was run.
Well, let me rewind. Let's talk. Why does government exist? Remember, we were going to say on each of these institutions, what is the purpose of government in y'all's opinion? Johnny, what do you think? When the tribe was getting around and some brilliant dude was like, I got a great idea, let's form a government. What was the purpose behind that thought process?
I think that was to improve the daily life amongst the people. And I think we've kind of had all these other things that have come into play with that, politicians, agendas, motives, personal motives, and stuff like that that's jumped in the way of that, and we've kind of lost the central idea of what it should be.
Yeah. Will, what do you think?
Honestly, in my opinion, because humans a long time ago, we were hunter-gatherers. We got all our stuff just out in the wild. We didn't really need a government because we could do it
all
on
this
our
started
own.
somewhere, right?
I don't know when officially the first government came into being, but at some point we needed a centralized economy and a way that it could be controlled. Because if you think about it, in the end, all the government really does is turn your economy upside down or right way around. And I mean, we did.
But ideally, as well,
we did need people that in the end, because we also got to the point where, well, now you can't just go around killing people. We needed a body of people that could go around and set these rules and regulations for society and culture. Because as much as anarchy sounds like a really fun idea. You need somebody in power. You need somebody who's saying, no, you can't just kill,
Organize the chaos.
Yeah, you need somebody to organize the chaos. And once again, we got to the point where we needed a centralized economy, and a government was the best way to do that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think my best approach on describing the purpose of government would be structure. We needed to be, ideally, the way it's supposed to function is to create a standard of living and a general, sense of ethics and morality, and the general way to control and conduct yourself as a human being that best benefits the collective, right?
Right.
And the way that manifested was by elected representatives. Sure, you look at the historical timeline, and we'll talk about cultural evolution in another episode of ours, but if you look at how societies and civilizations were controlled, you see a lot of like kings, queens, and dictatorships and empires and whatnot. But we evolved throughout time to basically, try to be as fair, at least in the Western world, try to be as fair as we can to the population, to the masses, right? Where it's not just controlled by dictatorships or oligarchies or whatever. So that is how it's supposed to work. Now, in my opinion, when you look at a democracy and the structural function of electing representatives, so the whole point of our government is, and the reason that we need elected representatives is because when we were writing the Constitution, forming how things should work, the way the world should work, for example, when they were writing these things, at that time it was unfeasible to even think that everyone could have a voice. Not everyone can get into the courthouse, cast a vote. It would have been absurd, right, to expect that. It would have been chaos.
So say Athens tried it a long time before that and it didn't work out.
So, faced with that problem, what did they say? They said, well, let's get together. You guys pick your best dude, or, back then dude, now dudette. Put them in the, in office, and then we'll chat about it together, and they'll represent you, right? Because they know what you want. That's why you elected them. That's the way it's supposed to work. Now, with the way that things have evolved, obviously there's a lot of kinks in that chain. You get lobbyists, you get the super PACs and all that are buying politicians and whatnot. So, if we get into the way the world should work, and again, I want to reference the internet with this. I think, and this is a crazy, crazy idea, and a lot of people say I'm nuts for when I say this because it's so off the wall.
Right.
But I honestly would love to eventually find a way, since now we don't have that barrier. We can, with the internet, we can communicate. We can collectively discuss and talk about issues and you know, and iron out the most fair way to do things. We don't really have a need. If some sort of system was implemented, you know, I know there's a lot of like things that we would have to address, like hacking and whatnot. But if there was some way to figure that out, we could almost completely eliminate the need for elected representatives. And that is, you know, again, way off the wall. That's a world that is just, you know, it's science fiction right now. But I would love to see something like that, you know, evolve. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I think the fact that there are so many, as you mentioned, science fiction, there are so many futuristic, you know, set thousands of years in the future, of course, because, I mean, it would take a long time for us to finally actually get to that point, that have their unified Earth, or their, you know, the united Earth, or whatever. They're all under one flag. It's all, you know, hell, Futurama has the president of the Earth. Like, you know, it's not just. I wouldn't say there aren't still elected. There are probably still elected officials in those scenarios. But I think through the fact that we are so connected and we are so in each other's lives all the time. I mean, hell, my phone never stops blowing up with text messages from 6 different groups and Facebook messages from a few. I mean, we are all connected. We can all get our voices out to each other one way or the other. We're doing it right now. Like, you know,
exactly.
Yeah. So I think it's possible that if somebody at some point, if like, let's say our voices were to get big enough, well, eventually people are going to be like, let's do it the way they want to do it. You know, let's say they come up with a certain, and everybody takes a vote, and well, now we're doing it the way Matt, Will, and Johnny want to do it, you know?
Right.
And as long as there's someone willing to actually say, the Supreme Court says, yeah, all right, let's do it, let's go, then I think there will always be that judiciary. There will always be that.
And that's another facet of it, I think. There are so many different ideologies throughout the globe that it would be a great opportunity to create smaller localized governments where if you, and this is kind of an extreme,
city-states,
if you have, you know, for example, there are people out there, I know most Western people say it's crazy, but Sharia law, for example, if you wanted to create, you know, have their own, whatever, people should be allowed to do what they believe in, and as long as you're not, like I said, you know, I disagree with the fundamentals of that,
right.
But that's just, I'm using them as an example. We could create smaller, more community centralized governments and societies that could function according to their own beliefs.
I was going to say, I've had the picture in my head before of a world that doesn't have like any major government system. Like there's no American government or English government or French government, but like kind of it's like reverting back to the village style of living, where you go from, you've got a village of 200 people and it's small enough to where, you know, maybe you've got your mayor, but everybody can have their voice, and you know there is a set leader, but your rules and laws and whatever are different from the village that's 10 miles down the road, and there's not a president who can come into your village or anybody else's village and say, well, I'm sorry, this is how this works, and no matter what you say. I think if things were to be on a, because once you get to the scale of millions of people, yes, you kind of need a larger government. You're going to bump officials. But
elbows.
If you could district it all off, and you could have, you know, your little villages, for lack of a better word to use, then yeah, I think you could go without having an elect. You would definitely still need that one leader who would be the.
It's
one
like states
say,
versus the federal government.
Yeah,
I mean that concept,
exactly.
but the way that we've let the United States has developed. I mean, when you look back at what the founding fathers truly wanted, how many laws and mandates have we written since then that have controlled and told people how to live their lives?
Like every single one.
That was never their intent. They intended to have a free society. They basically, if you read them and listen in a lot of the transcripts and stuff, they have envisioned a world where people could basically do whatever they wanted to do, the pursuit of happiness, as long as it didn't infringe on people. It's very simple. That should be really the only rule. The golden rule, right?
Yeah.
Do unto others as you would, like, don't screw with people, don't do anything that would adversely affect them, as long, we've way overcomplicated society and government and laws.
Well, and it helps that you've got people that are just so willing to be sheep,
Well, and that is I think the problem. It's that level of open-mindedness and outside the box thinking is bizarre to most people, because that's such a foreign concept, because that's what we've been conditioned to believe. We've always, what bothers me a lot of times is when somebody's talking about doing something and they're like, well, you can't do that, that's illegal. A lot of people have a really hard time differentiating legality from morality or ethics.
Moral and ethics.
Just because something is illegal does not make it bad, and that's a fundamental understanding that a lot of people they struggle with comprehending that.
Yeah.
And again, that's because we're conditioned to believe that the law is the law, and because we say so. We need more people to question why. We need more people that are having these kinds of dialogues to progress and to actually instill change in the way that the world's working.
And we need less people that make the people that ask the questions disappear, because those people are out there.
Right. Listeners, if we ever end up in a ditch somewhere, we don't we're not going to die of an overdose. We're not going to kill ourselves. So if there's any suspicious deaths going on, what happened.
Definitely Big Brother.
Because you're right. This is a very threatening kind of conversation to the people that do control
progressive minds.
Societies. You see documentary filmmakers that, end up. There was one guy, I forget the name, but he committed suicide by shooting himself in the head twice.
Can't do that.
Anybody want to explain that one to me? I don't really know how you can, And plus, even if I did it and I missed or I did, I'm not going to do it again. I'm going to be like, oh my God, this hurts like hell.
Call 911.
Right? I immediately regret this decision. I can't even kill myself right.
It just makes you feel worse about yourself. I can't even kill myself.
No, that's kind of
that's terrible.
That is terrible, terribly funny, but yeah. So I think in terms of government, I don't want to get too detailed here, but what do you think, Johnny? What are your thoughts on what we were just talking about?
No, I mostly agree. You're not going to have everyone in a community or a country, for that matter, that's going to agree on one idea.
Right.
People are going to have different preferences, and they're going to want different things, and they think things should be this way, and the other side thinks this way. So I do like how our government in America it kind of plays both of those sides and brings them in. But I don't think everyone's voice is heard. For sure.
No, there's no way.
Yeah, no, I think we should have a system set in place where instead of sponsoring these our leaders, these larger corporations and such, it should be more so the people, and have their ideas heard, and they can vote on those issues.
How could we do that? Because I think you're right. That is the goal. Ultimately, that's the ideal. That's how it's supposed to work. So how do we circumvent these lobbyists and these organizations from funding, because that's the big problem. We vote for somebody based upon what the platform is that they're running.
Right.
And then they don't do it because,
they don't have to
because they get into office, and then the guy taps them on the shoulder who's really controlling the strings and says, this is what you're going to do, or we're not going to pay the bills to fund your campaign next season. So that's a big part of this discussion, is trying to figure out the solution, and it's a complex question. What do you think?
Yeah, that is going to be hard in itself, and then implementing that to where the government is okay with that. But I think a lot of people don't understand is there's more of us than there is people in Washington. We as a people, as a whole, we have a lot more influence than what we tend to realize.
You're exactly right.
You are.
Yep. That's an excellent point. And that is one thing that I think like people like MLK, they did an excellent job of empowering people. I think that's one of the biggest things and that's what it is going to take, is those leaders and inspirational people that don't promote themselves, but they literally are just normal, like you and I, people that rise and have that conviction to the point where they empower other people to actually understand the power that they have.
My thing is, when it comes to that kind of stuff, like you said, Johnny, yeah, there are for sure a whole hell of a lot more people out in the general public than there are in the White House or in D.C. or in the House of Representatives, in general. The only problem there is once you raise your voice to a certain level, and I feel like in the past couple of years this has been proven to be true more than we'd like to be willing to admit, the powers that be are not afraid
to stamp it out.
I was going to say, get mad at me, listeners, if you want to, but the powers that be are not afraid to turn the guns at their disposal on their people, innocent or not, to quiet their voices. They're just not. Look at all the police brutality. Look at all the... If it came down to it, if there was a riot at the gates of the White House where people weren't using, life-threatening weapons, if we had sticks and rocks and we were throwing them at military personnel who have got protection against sticks and rocks, those military personnel would open fire. And it's because it's what they're trained to do.
We discussed this in our first episode, remember, when we were joking kind of about the vigilantes, and that's the problem. The people that obtain power to begin with, you have to ask, why do they rise to? That's what they desire. That's what they don't have that filter that the normal person that really is good internally, they're willing to do things that good people aren't.
Exactly.
So that is a big part of that equation, and it's a fundamental problem because good people aren't willing to kill people that are harming society, for lack of a better word, because that's not a cool thing to do. It's not cool to kill people. Bad people will do that, and that is the one big issue. So, and that's a delicate. How do you approach that? That's a basic carnal instinctual problem within the human condition. That's kind of when you go into the animal kingdom. The alpha male is the one that's going to be beating up everybody, taking the women for whatever. He doesn't care what people are thinking of him. He doesn't care about what the right thing to do is. And ultimately, if you really look at it, we can get, I don't want to tiptoe into any religious conversation or anything here, but ultimately, people are pretty much animals. We are just very complex, highly cognitive.
I would say not even pretty much. We are mammals. We are animals. Yeah. We are.
So and you look, it's on a different level, but you see the same behaviors manifesting within these situations. So how do we solve that? Outside of knocking off, doing the House of Cards Frank Underwood approach and pushing the journalists in front of a train station, how do we fix that problem? That's the big, and that's where I think what Johnny was saying is going to come into play, where people are going to have to collectively approach it. Because if we keep trying one by one to knock these big politicians down, that's what you're right. We're going to get cherry picked and stamped out and silenced, whether it's through assassination or if it's through money or whatever. And a big part of that, I think, is we're going to have to change our value systems. A lot of times when you see people doing this for the right reasons, they sell out. They get to the point where it's like, well, let's put him on the payroll and he'll do whatever we tell him to now.
Exactly. Everybody's got a price for anything. So
if you don't value material possessions, if you don't value the things that they're going to throw at you to silence you, then you continue to do that and you continue to inspire people and to set the right example. Yeah. So.
Yeah, definitely. I think we need an independent voice too, because if you control the media and you control the way, the platform in which people bring these issues up and what, if they have a way to put in their input, if the government controls that, then it can be changed. You look at the internet, for instance, and the what was it just passed the
net neutrality.
Net neutrality.
Right.
You look at those big companies that, like I said earlier, paid money to these politicians.
They're selling out, man. Yeah.
Now they're gaining more control of what was supposed to be a free system.
Yeah.
So I think it needs to be independent also. But what is it going to take for people to realize, hey...
That's $1 million question.
I think all it should take for people to realize, I think it should be as simple as this. there should be no amount of money that you will allow your government to receive to be able to purchase your private information.
You know what it is?
You know?
It's simpler than that. You've got to care.
That too.
That's really the bottom line. None of this is everyone. Pardon my language here. You know, I want to keep that clean badge under our podcast name, but everyone bitches about pretty much everything that we're fed and but no one does anything about it.
Not a thing.
Right?
They complain on Facebook. They go on rants on Facebook all day long.
The only way that any of this is ever going to change is if people care enough to actually cause them to act. Talk is cheap, you know. And this very podcast, this whole concept of how the world should work, is our version of acting. Because the only we're unknown. We're not, you know, nobody knows our names yet. We're nobody. And the only way that we're ever going to become somebody is to spread this very message, to try and empower other people to do the very same things, right? Because eventually a podcast will become an organization will become a movement will become a brand new way of living. You know, it's one thing after the other, and it has to build and build and build until it actually causes change.
I love that you said that. It's much easier to be a sheep.
It is.
It's so easy. And it takes that one person, like Martin Luther King.
Right.
It takes that one person to start a movement.
This cycle repeats itself, right?
History does.
What happens, it continues and continues and continues, and for some reason, we don't ever get it. Somebody will come along, start a new thing in society, and like the Founding Fathers, do it for the right reasons. The wrong people will take the reins, muck it all up, and then so what is the average lifestyle cycle? If you look at anthropology and records and stuff, the average civilization exists, I think it's like 300-something years or whatever.
I think we've about
until they crumble. You look at the Roman Empire, it's happened since literally the dawn of time. What is it going to take for somebody to understand that and to maintain, that's the problem. People die. We have a life cycle, right?
Yeah.
So you constantly have to make sure that those values and morals and the correct things are passed along from one generation to the next. So that is really what it's going to take. And I think we have something now with the internet that we've never had as a civilization. We've never had this ability to connect with one another on such a global scale. And that I think is going to have to be maintained. The integrity of the internet and the integrity of our ability to connect en masse has to be prioritized over everything.
You know, and
if we lose that, we lose the biggest weapon in our arsenal.
I actually think you brought up a good point, and I just want to the crumbling point you made. I think we're getting there with the realization, because I have the mindset of the fact that every major, Egypt, Rome, the Greek Empire, Sparta, Macedonia, all of them, none of them, which one of those empires exists today? The Spanish Empire is not there anymore.
Egypt,
the English Empire. Well, okay, but
not like the
the English Empire is no longer there. Like, yeah, England is still there, but their empire.
Thanks a lot, America.
Yeah, right? Damn. But everybody who's been on that scale, been that type of level, been on that type of level to the world. The superpower.
Yeah.
Superpowers fall, and I'm sorry, but I know I have the mindset of the fact that our time is coming, and I think it's coming a lot faster than people would like to admit.
I think people will admit, honestly.
People admit it. There are people out there that'll admit it.
A lot of the like the bar conversations that are around in public, that's a pretty common thing.
I feel like we are not. If you have
look at the president.
Look at the president. Look at the president. Look at him.
We've become a joke.
People do not. I have seen it since he's been elected. Other world leaders do not view him as the leader of the free world.
We have no respect.
He's a joke.
We have no respect.
And for one thing,
hold on.
Since we're talking about government, can I just mention this real quick?
What?
I think there should be one more, other than being 35 years old, I think there should be one more requirement to be president. I think you need at least 5 years of political experience. Sorry.
I don't know if I agree.
I don't think a non-politician should be
I don't necessarily agree, because I think it's good. I think it's good to shake up and get different. Well, yeah, and I will preface this, as much as we're talking about it, I'm not a Trump hater, to be honest. I think Trump's smarter than a lot of people give him credit for.
He is smarter than that.
Ridicule me for that if you will.
He just
But the guy, you got to give it, the guy wins. I mean, look at him. It's hard to win the literal election of of the leading power of the world and have as big of a joke like facade as he does.
That's true.
That's a difficult thing. However, he did that.
He
Granted,
did
the left didn't put up the best candidate, but I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it's good to shake up perspectives, and I don't think you need. I mean, it's good to have, but you need people that are raised in politics, people that have had the experience, are very difficult to convince that things should work in a different way.
I just think
maybe he's not the right one.
I feel like we need a better vetting process for who we can have as our candidates. Because come on, let's be real. We've had two TV stars be our president, and neither one.
Reagan.
Yeah, and neither one.
Be careful. People love Reagan.
People love Reagan. I'm not trying to hate on Reagan. I'm just saying that they both have their moment. They're two of the most famous for the.
The second continuity book actually opens with a Reagan quote, as a matter of fact, which he asked the UN, and I love this quote because it's all about perspective. He says, "I often wonder what the world would be like, and how I'm paraphrasing, but how we would unite if we were faced with an extraterrestrial threat." Dude literally got up in the United Nations and said, "What if aliens attacked us? We'd all be friends then." And actually, that quote was I used that as the inspiration for one of the poems I wrote about perspective. It's about this two people that fight, and eventually a third comes in, and the two are like, "Oh my God, he's going to screw us!" So they unite, fight the third, and it keeps happening and happening until ultimately they all get it. We're like, "Hey, why are we fighting anyway?" But yeah, I think that's good for the government portion of this now. Okay, so anything else that you guys want to add before we move on? And this last one, we're going to approach very delicately because one, it's going to be episode 10, our season finale, and two, it's probably the most taboo, hot button topic, and this is where you get the most.
Get a lot of hate here.
The most heated. So we really need to be aware of how we approach it. But we're going to talk about the religious institution, right? One of the main things, and not even this religion versus that religion, what doctrine is the right or wrong to follow. I specifically want to focus on the actual attendance and how religion is actually, if you look at statistics, on somewhat of a decline. If you look at church, and I was referencing an article here on, I found it on churchleaders.com. It's kind of it's a website, that talks about a lot of things in the religious world, but and these are just bullet points from this article. Less than 20% of Americans regularly attend church, which is actually half of what the pollsters report. A lot of times these numbers that they're putting up are kind of doctored, or even maybe the censor or whatever they call it, the census is done incorrectly or whatever. So
they picked the wrong sample.
It says, the findings reveal that the actual rate of church attendance from head counts is less than half of the 40% that pollsters report. Numbers from actual counts of people in Orthodox Christian churches, Catholic, mainline, and evangelical, show that in 2004, 17.7% of the population attended a Christian church on any given weekend. I think there's a lot of moving parts that contribute to the decline in numbers here. One, I think it has a lot to do with information age. The exposure to contrasting points of view have contributed to people exploring other spirituality, other doctrines, or even going into atheism. The movement of science, the development of science. There's a big war in a lot of the scientific community when it battles with the religious community, because they're all based on tangible empirical evidence and whatnot. So I think that has one thing to do. But what do you guys think? I mean, I know the three of us came from Christian families. I mean, we'll be transparent there. I have my own personal struggle with it, but I know, what do you guys think? I mean, just in terms, you don't talk about personally what you think of religion, but what do you think along those lines? What are your thoughts on that?
On the numbers?
Yeah, just in general, like what direction do you think the religious institution is taking right now?
I think honestly, I see a lot that people are going more from, in a millennial generation, there are plenty of religious, and I don't just mean Christian, I mean, Islamic, Christian, Buddhist. There are a lot of religious people out there in our generation, but I do believe that a lot of us are shifting more towards just being spiritual. And by that I mean we don't necessarily believe that there is, there's God isn't necessarily
Agnostic, would you say?
Well, I wouldn't say agnostic either, because agnostic means you're not sure. Agnostic means that you don't really know if there's a divinity or a divinity.
You're open to it, but
you're open to it, but you don't know. But I think like me, for instance, I don't consider myself religious. I do not identify as a Christian. I do not identify as I don't identify as any religion. But I consider myself to be spiritual, because I do believe that somewhere out there, whether it's outside of our universe or have y'all ever seen it? Keeping in with the alien movies, in Prometheus you have the engineers that actually
governing higher power.
Sort of like that. I do believe that, because I mean, if you look at it all and you think about it, in my opinion, something had to have been there to create all of it, but I don't necessarily think that it's something that wants to be worshipped or needs to be worshipped or even needs to be found, for that matter, because it's like a deist, the great clockmaker.
I think we're kind of tiptoeing into what I want to save, at least, or at least shelf for episode 10. Because I'd rather focus more on the institution of religion more so than the dynamic between whether or not we believe in one thing or the other. All good points. I agree, but
I understand better what you're trying to say now.
Right. So I mean, just in terms of the religious institution, and with all of the tension with Islamophobia and all the things going on right now, I think there's been a spotlight cast into a lot of religious institutions, and I think that there's a reason that it's declining. I think in a lot of these studies.
Well, and I think a lot of once again in the millennial generation, it's not necessarily even there is a decline. There's a definite decline that has been kind of seen. But we're also just turning away from the traditional churches. Your Methodist and Catholic and Baptist and Church of Christ. Since I don't know any other denominations of any other religions. I'm just going off of what I know here. But a lot of people our age are going to places like here in the Wilson County in this area. We have a Crossroads. All the non-denominational churches. Crosspoint's a big one. The churches that they have electric guitars and drums and stuff, and they get up on stage and sing and party and just have fun, and they look at everything in a more like a lot of your traditional churches, like your Catholics and your Baptists and your Methodists, like. In it going back to government,
rigid.
They're very rigid, and there are a lot of the people that are like, well, no gay marriage, no abortions, no
instruments,
no instruments, no dancing, like, and a lot of the young people are going, well, wait a second,
what?
Hold on, why can't we do this? And so they're going out and they're making these, they're founding these non-denominational churches where they can be themselves, but they can still also be religious. They can still believe in God, and they can still read the Bible and worship and feel like they're being accepted. It's just another outlet of feeling.
I think
like
a big portion, just to kind of build upon what you're saying, or at least take out one of the points that you made. I think a lot of that, in terms of why this decline is occurring, a lot of that is because those rigid viewpoints foster a lot of resentment.
Yeah, they do.
Like, why, and this, I think, in our generation, there's a reason that a lot of people say that the millennial generation is. We got, they have a little bit more of an ego maybe than we deserve, and but I will say to their credit, they do have the stones, for lack of a better word, to question why in a lot of cases. That's why
we're willing to stand up.
But at the same time, I think we also have become, and maybe this has to do with entertainment and the culture we've been raised in, but we are a lot more cynical and stoic than and I think there should be a little bit more compassion in terms of the way we approach our culture or whatever. But I think, so the rigid systems, I think, is one reason. And one thing I want to talk about is online. And this is, I've read some studies here, too, when I was doing the research for this talk, that a lot of churches, the tithing numbers are going down because members aren't even really members anymore. They're just chilling, waking up, having their breakfast, watching the sermon online.
Joel Osteen, man.
Yeah, exactly. And, I mean, people like him, he gets a huge, obviously, boost financially.
He's just a businessman.
But the institutions, I mean, in terms of the actual churches and whatnot, the funding has been going down because of those, it's funny because it's kind of ironic because the message is being spread because they're exposing to more people globally, even online, but they're not seeing the financial return because that enables people just to sit at home without there's a certain obligation when you see a collection plate be passed in front of you and everyone else is putting money in it. That kind of fosters, the to participate. When you're at home watching it by yourself, you don't have that, that judgment.
You don't want to call that 1-800 number.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to deal with that.
So, I don't know. It's a kind of a catch-22. It's like one of those things where it's good for the church, but again, it's bad for the church because, but, and that's just one component of this point, with religion. But Johnny, what are your thoughts on this? I know you're probably a little more deeply embedded. You're ordained, right? You can marry people.
Yeah. No, I think we're starting to realize that we aren't perfect, and humans have flaws. And we recently have begun to accept that. And although a lot of religions recognize that we are flawed, I've found in my experiences that there's a lot of religious people that are very
judgmental.
Yeah, they're very judgmental.
Yeah, they stand for precisely what they're supposed to stand against.
Right, and that doesn't put a good image on
hypocrisy.
It's a hypocrisy, and that doesn't display a good image on what you're trying to convey.
Right,
your stance on things.
Yeah,
so
it's a sad irony. Of a lot of, and I'll admit I'm not as versed. I mean, I've studied a lot of the different doctrines like Buddhism and all that, so I try to inform myself. I've read the Quran, for example, to try and understand this whole terrorism thing. But in Christianity, at least in my experience, in a lot of the churches I've been in, there's a lot of that. Like Johnny's mentioning. I mean, there is. I had one guy say, I was raised Catholic, right? My mom was very religious. She raised me Catholic, and I had a Catholic baptism. And I attended a church when I lived in West Virginia after college, and the guy, I remember it was in a post-college class type thing, and Bible study, and he was like, wait, when he found out I was Catholic, right? He said, you haven't been baptized. I was like, well, I have. It was just when I was, young and little or whatever, and that's how the Catholics do it. I was confirmed. That's like kind of the equivalent of baptism, the way you look at it. He was like, well, you're not allowed to be a member here unless you're baptized. Literally said this, and I was like, wait a minute, so you're going to tell me I'm sitting here working in the nursery, watching y'all's kids, volunteering my time, but I'm not allowed to be a member because of a formality? Stone stare in my eyes, and he was like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm telling you. And that's what Johnny's talking about. I mean, that's the kind of hypocrisy, and you're pushing people away,
right? Yeah.
Which is the opposite of what you're preaching.
That's why I loved being raised. I mean, as much as I'm not religious anymore, I was raised Methodist, and their whole thing is, I mean, it's all over. There's open hearts, open minds, open doors, and I tell you what, if there's one denomination of the Christian church that lives up to what they tell you, it is the Methodist denomination. When they tell you open hearts, open minds, they are not going to turn you away for whatever reason. You may think a Christian will turn you away. You walk up to a Methodist preacher or something like that, and you start telling him your problems. You start telling him you're gay or you had an abortion or whatever, and he's going to sit there and listen to he or she, because they can be either, like a Catholic priest, or even there are a few others that are only male, I think. But he or she is going to sit there and listen to you and give you an actual well-intentioned, good-hearted response instead of just being, well, you're going to burn. Sorry,
That's good.
And they're not going to think you're flawed or that you're, the Bible verse, God is love, they're going to tell you, well, God loves you anyway. There may be people out there that think because you're gay or because you had an abortion, you're not lovable and you're not set for heaven. But I can tell you right now, as long as you live a good life and you do things, and you're a good-intentioned person and you have a good heart, somebody's going to accept you. And that was always my favorite part of being in the Methodist Church.
That's important.
That everybody accepted you, no matter who you were, what you were.
That's consistent to the doctrine.
It is, yeah.
And that I think is really important, and that's something that you don't see a lot of in a lot of different denominations and whatnot. But again, that's also another kind of technicality there. But I think, and I just thought it was important. I didn't want to focus too much on religion, like I said, because it's such a hot button topic. But I think it's important because when we're talking about institutions, that is such a prevalent one in society that deserves to be addressed. So we've these two segments have been long. We kind of knew they would be. We got a little bit They drew out a little bit longer than we anticipated,
passion
but
in it.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
these are important issues, and I'm glad that we're taking the time to do this, and I really appreciate the people listening that have stuck with us, because we value your input just as much as we do our own. So I encourage you, definitely, if you're following the podcast or the movement in any way. Please, as much interaction as we can get from everyone, we that's what we're going for, because that's our goal with this organization of how the world should work, is to eventually we're going to incorporate as a 501c3 nonprofit and try and our growth plan is to partner with different organizations, American Hearts Association and Habits, any organization that benefits society and does the right thing, at least as the collective is concerned. That's what we're going for. So we're basically just trying to improve the way life for people, because it's a very unfair world that we occupy. But so before I want to close, as always, I'll get to the poem, but I'm going to mention a couple of the responses we got on social media. But do you guys have anything you want to add before we wrap up here?
I'm all good.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you again to Virginia Corbitt and everybody that's been involved in social media. So again, I mentioned this earlier in the first segment when I talked about Jennifer's response, but this week's question, episode 3, will be covering institutions and ways to reform. What are some thoughts, and what are some things that might be changed to improve them? And we got several responses. I'm going to cherry pick a couple here. Michael Jasper, who I believe he played for the Browns, the football team, for a while, and now I believe he coaches. But decriminalization of drugs, prisons based on rehabilitation and that are self-sufficient rather than profitable. Excellent point. Prisons for profit, to me, is just a very counterintuitive concept. Mm-hmm. And whoever thought that was a good idea and passed that, I don't know how we let that one slip through the cracks. Because that sounds like the goal is to make your prison big, and that's totally counterintuitive. But Michael Jasper, really good point. I'm glad you mentioned that. Corey Breivik, system should run on evidence-based pragmatism, not by idealism. Every institution and law passed should be required to show how it's improving people's lives via data. If it's not, repealed automatically and replaced. Good. That's a technical scientific approach to, with the data and everything. That's good. That's logic and, empirical evidence. Mac Lunn, who is going to be our guest on our technology episode. I'd love to get the ball rolling on educational reform. I love listening to Ken Robinson speak, so here's a great jumping off point, and he linked an article in the post on our Facebook page, The Changing Education Paradigms, taken from the TED Talks, the TED organization. I know Johnny mentioned that earlier, that we attended the TEDx Nashville 2017. Another thing, if you guys are interested, if you're listening to this, that's right up your alley. The TED Talks are, basically branded the same thing we're doing. It's just really, really prominent people in society talking about important things.
Ideas worth listening to.
Exactly. Isn't that their log line?
That's their thing.
So thank you guys again for the social media responses. The last thing, like I said, I'm going to do here is read a poem. Okay, and the poem, the title is Politics. I picked this one because it pertained to the structure of government and everything, and kind of the corruption we're talking about. But so it goes like this. It's a line, the first line, and it's followed by a line that's sort of reading in between the lines in parentheses. So, politics. Vote for me, folks. Your candidate of change. My glistening smile can sell anything. Don't be shy, guys. My numbers are great, but mostly my budget will pay any rate. The rest are corrupt. I say what I mean, and hope that my lines aren't read in between. Once I'm in office, you'll smile and cheer, regret your decision, and long for next year. Don't wait any longer, just run to the polls. Shut up and vote, my food's getting cold. For man and for country, I'll represent all, but mostly the folks that I golfed with last fall. Elections are over, let's tally the vote. I hope they paid off those invites to my boat. Yes, here we are, in office I stand. Time to wreak havoc on your forsaken land. Again, maybe a little cynical, but just, kind of an impassioned response to how the world currently works, or doesn't work, however you want to
Look at it.
look at it. But again, thank you all. I really appreciate all of the support we've gotten. Will, thank you for joining us today.
happy to be
Johnny,
here.
as always, and I look forward to next week.
All right, thank you all for tuning in to How the World Should Work. Join us next week for our talk on sex, the different ideologies concerning it, and what roles it plays in today's society. So thank you all again for everyone listening. Until next time.